We have just a few housekeeping items before we start. This session has been approved for 2 hours of criminogenic CEUs. If you need to apply for CEUs, please put your name and your email address in the chat so I can be sure to send you your attendance certificate to you for applications. Please stay muted so we don't get background noise. You may unmute to ask a question and then please mute yourself again. Questions will be taken during the presentation. You may either unmute to ask or place your question in the chat. We will be monitoring that. This presentation is being recorded and the recording will be available on the Douglas County website for later viewing. And now, using Hope Science to work with kids and families, we welcome Scott Butler and Javier Castillote.
Good morning. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate the introduction. Thank you for having us here. Very excited, and we've been looking forward to this day for quite a while now. So, yeah, like Deborah said, my name is Javier Castillote, and I am the Trauma Informed Initiatives Program Manager at Project Harmony. For those of you here in Omaha, Douglas County, we are the Child Advocacy Center here. So we work with law enforcement and the HHS when responding to allegations of child abuse and neglect. Beyond that, my role as a trauma-informed initiatives program manager, I oversee an initiative that we have community-wide that's called Trauma Matters Omaha, where we're trying to bring awareness to the impact of trauma, and we're basically working towards creating a trauma-informed community. So we're making a lot of efforts to bring knowledge, skills to professionals who are interacting with individuals who have experienced traumas and are maybe showing signs of traumatic stress, so we can serve them better, so we can help them integrate with their traumas better in order to create a better community. We got Scott. Scott, go for it.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. There we go. I muted myself instead of unmuted. Oh, can you hear me, Avi? Okay, I'm getting all sorts of mixed signals. I'm the director of training here at Project Harmony. Javier and I actually office right next to each other. I came to Project Harmony a year ago following 33 years in K-12 education, including spending 8 of those years working primarily with kids with significant behaviors. During that time, I ran a Rule 18 school for kids that were in shelter care as part of their court processes. And they taught us a lot about this topic. So you're going to hear me reference our work with those kids frequently. So it's great to see all of you here today and to see some names I know. As Deb said, we want this to be a conversation. That said, we'd love it if you leave your cameras on. It makes it easier for us to know we're actually talking to people rather than blank screens. But we want this to be a conversation where you can unmute and just ask away. You don't need any formal recognition. Just turn your microphone on and interrupt us and ask away. If you prefer, you can put a question in the chats, but we're going to try to keep it interactive as much as we can via Zoom with 40-some people.
Cool. And just, yeah, to kind of begin a little bit of engagement. I know there's 42 people currently here in this room, and so we cannot possibly go by one to do introductions. We can see your names, which is fantastic. But I would like to, if you can take just a second to type in the chat. I know you've already been putting some stuff with your emails and stuff like that. But if you can just tell me what you do, what's your role, what's your title, and how long have you been doing that? So just go ahead and post away and we'll just kind of get a better idea of who you are. And that allows us also to guide that conversation a little bit better. So go for it. I'm excited to see what you're all posting. Ashley, yeah, licensed clinical social worker. Great. Juvenile detention facility in the area. How long have you been doing that, Ashley? Just write the number. Either follow 3 years. Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, let's see what else. Everybody else, tell us a little bit.
Hi, this is Avanla. I'm the Executive Director of New Life Family Alliance, and I will be joined with me today, James Lado, our Operation Manager, and Tut Cat, our Coordinator and Outreach. And we've been in business for almost now 4 years, but we've been working with the Douglas County youth around 2 years now.
Awesome, Aban. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
you're here. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more people posting. A lot of social workers, mental health providers, behavioral health providers, Child Saving Institute, multiple organizations as well. Martin,
Juvenile
Chief
justice.
Criminal Justice. We have some family advocates. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can see some of these things and I will be scrolling when I'm not talking, when it's Scott's turn to guide the conversation, just to kind of get a better sense of everyone. But yeah, so building hope, this training that we've brought in very, very recently. So Scott was kind of the driving force behind bringing hope science into the work that we do here at Project Harmony. Let me go ahead and share the screen in here and we can begin talking a little bit more deeply about what this means and how you can utilize it. So our learning objectives are as follows. What we want to get to today is the following: be able to define hope, right? What does that mean, right? What is the definition of hope, and how it may differ to what most people think hope is, right? So that's one of the biggest things that we're going to focus on, make that differentiation. We'll talk about how you can measure hope in yourself and how you can do that in others, in the people that you work with, friends, family, etc. And we'll talk about how you can apply hope science in your life, in your professional life, in your personal life, so that you can improve outcomes with the youth and families that you're working with, right? So let's start by just kind of going over a quick little story in here. And I don't know how many of you are fans of Greek mythology, how many of you studied it at school. I'm going to share with you a quick story. I'm just going to get to the gist, to the point of the story, right? So basically you have Zeus, who's the god of gods, right, in Greek mythology. And he was, working with Prometheus and Epimetheus, and basically, Zeus got angry at some point because Prometheus defied him. He basically gave Prometheus the opportunity to create the newest forms of life on Earth. And Prometheus created men and women. And then he asked Zeus, okay, well, I have to give humans protection, a form of protection. So let's give them fire. But Zeus said, no, fire is for the gods. You should not give human beings fire, right? But Prometheus went ahead and gave man power. So Zeus got really, really mad and punished him. I'm not going to go into the details because I'm not going to slime anyone because it's pretty gruesome. But yeah, anyway, so Prometheus saw that Prometheus was suffering and saved him from that punishment. And that's that, right? So, but Zeus wanted to also punish not only Prometheus and Epimetheus, but wanted to also punish human beings, right? So he created Pandora, and he gave Pandora a lot of gifts: beauty, kindness, generosity, peace, etc. And she was so beautiful that Epimetheus kind of fell in love with her and decided to marry her, right? So Zeus decided to give them a gift for their wedding, and he gave them, or most specifically Pandora, a box. Have you all heard of Pandora's box? Just kind of nod your head if you have your camera on. Just say yes, whatever you want to do on the chat. Thumbs up, whatever, right? So those of you who have heard of Pandora's box, what happens? Well, Zeus tells Pandora, hey, here's this box, but you cannot open it. Now, Pandora, being a human being full of curiosity, sometimes not without the ability to, abstain from temptation, opened it, right? And what happened is that as she opened the box, all of the things that are plaguing humankind came out. So death, grief, disease, envy, greed, all of these horrible things, right? And so Pandora... COVID-19. Yeah, that's that. There you go. And so Pandora got pretty freaked out, of course, because she opened and she let all of these things out. When she was told not to open the box, she was very guilty, feeling pretty guilty. So she closed the box before the last thing on the box could come out. Well, after a while of seeing all this pain and suffering, plaguing humankind, she opened the box again and let out the last thing that was on the box. And guess what that was? Hope, right? And hope is that bright spot, that bright light that makes all of this pain and suffering a little bit easier to, to live with, right? To get past it, to find the beauty and the great things in life. So with that story being told, we just like to always kind of prep things up like that. I want to pose a question to you, and I just want to hear from you what your definition of hope is. What comes to mind when you think about hope? This could be in a story, something that you remember, right? Something that happened to you, or it can be just like your main bare bones definition of what you think hope is. So again, go ahead and post it in the chat, or if you prefer, just unmute yourself and let's have that conversation. After all, I think that's more appropriate sometimes, and it's easier to express yourself through, verbally rather than on written form. So what comes to mind when you think of hope? What is hope? Hope, knowing that things can and will get better, Jasmine says. Yeah. What else? Do you all kind of agree with kind of the same definition? Do you have a hopeful story to share with us too that, highlights what hope is and what it means? Okay, Stephanie, I believe that these two shall pass, things will get better. Okay, yeah. Believe that things will get better. Having believed things will get better when they seem like they cannot, will not. Absolutely, right? So having kind of that outlook, right? That lens, that there is the possibility that despite the fact that things may be pretty bad right now, that there is always the possibility that things will get better, right? So I think I'm sensing this is the theme of what most people think about. So let's look at the definition of hope, and let's compare it with what you have in here. So hope is defined as the belief that your future can be brighter and better than your past, and that you actually have a role to play in making it happen. So all the things that you said, right, is that belief that things can be better. But additionally, that you actually have a role to play in making it happen. So when we think about hope, we're thinking about that one concept, right? That if we cultivate it, it can be a great predictor for our well-being and for outcomes, right? So we actually do have a role to play when we're being hopeful. Now, sometimes people think of hope as kind of a form of wishing, right? Just wishing that things can be better, right? Now, when you wish, that's different, right? You can wish for good weather, but do you have control over that? No, right? Can you have control over hoping that things in your life can get better if you make an effort and you make a proactive effort to be a part of that so that you can build that brighter future? That's what kind of is the difference. Scott, would you like to add something?
No, thanks. I was just going to chime in there about the whole concept of a wish, and that a wish we have no control over, but hope we do.
Yeah.
This definition comes from two of the current best practice thinkers on hope, Casey Gwynn and Chan Hellman. We're going to reference some of their work throughout the morning, and they have a tremendous book out. If any of you are interested in this topic and want to go further, we'll refer you to that. It's called Hope Rising, How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. Hope as a science really emerged from the positive psychology work in the early 90s. And Rick Snyder took the lead on developing hope science back in 1991 or so. So it's been around for about 30 years. We have well over 2,000 research studies that look at hope. And we've learned it's the #1 predictor of future well-being outcomes. Number one predictor. For example, those of you that might be in education, hope is a better predictor of going to college and actually graduating than the ACT or than students' high school grades. It's a better predictor of law school graduation than LSATs. It's a predictor of who's going to show up to work on any given day. So when we look at some of those research studies and just take a broad picture and pick out what do we know? What outcomes flow from hope? These are some of them. So again, I'm going to invite you to review this list. These are high hope kids have higher achievement, improved attendance, increased engagement in schools. You can see what happens for high hope adults. But which of these, as you look at it, are you thinking, wow, in my work, I would love to see more of that? Which of these outcomes are most of interest to you from the perspective of the kids you work with or the adults you work with? Again, I'd invite you just to chime in discussion or to put some of those in the chat. Somebody asked what was the name of the book and the author. I'll put that in the chat as well.
I just posted it,
Oh, you did,
Scott.
thanks.
I always forget Wynn's first name though. To you, Casey. There you go. And
Increased engagement, Stephanie says.
yeah,
What else?
more school involvement.
Better health,
Mm-hmm.
physical and mental, absolutely. So let's talk about some of these outcomes and what the research is telling us. When it comes to higher achievement, we know that kids who have higher levels of hope get better grades. They perform better on standardized achievements, measures of standardized achievement like state assessment scores, things like that. Their attendance at school is much better. By school engagement, we mean that they have an emotional connection to school. They believe that their teachers care about them. They want to be involved in activities. They want to participate in sports programming and such like that. They also continue to have a much higher graduation rate. Hope is also tied to all sorts of health outcomes, much like the ACEs study is, right? We'll talk in a little bit about hope and health in ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. We know that kids who are young adults who have a lot of ACEs in their past have more negative health outcomes. So it probably doesn't shock you that people that are high hope have better health. When it comes to adults, productivity, high hope people accomplish in 4 days what it takes lower hope people to do in 5. It equates to an entire extra day of productivity on the job. Those of you that work with kids, you might be interested in knowing if I take 2 teachers, give them very similar classrooms side by side, teaching the same content, and one is a high hope teacher and one is lower hope, the higher hope teachers' kids are going to outperform the lower teachers, the lower hope teachers by about 12 percentage points on standardized achievements. That's over a grade difference in their learning. When we talk about longevity in the career, is that an issue for any of us right now? You know, when we look at shortages that we're experiencing, people struggling to maintain mental health practices through COVID, schools struggling to find teachers. You're going to hear me talk about education a lot because I spent 33 years in education, 14 years as a school administrator. We do not have a teacher shortage. We have more than enough teachers in our community to do the job. We have a hope crisis for our teachers. They don't believe in the bright future of education anymore. They don't see the power that they have to make it better. And that's why they're leaving. If we want to solve that issue, we have to reinstill hope back into those places. Kelsey asked the question, where are we pulling this stuff? Is there a measure? And yes, Kelsey, there is a measure. Hope is very easy to assess. We're going to show you a measure today that you can use for yourselves. It takes less than 5 minutes to do. So from my work, where this really came about was I was working in behavioral programming with kids. And we were really struggling to see, why are we successful with this kid over here, but we continued, despite all the same efforts, to really struggle with this one over here. And we researched that topic over and over and over. And what we really found was, if we can instill a belief that my future can be better, and I have the power to make that happen, we can turn kids around. If I can't get a kid to believe in that, or if I can get the kid to believe in it, but not the parent, we're going to go on struggling for a long time. So hope is this key element that really allows us to drive programming for kids in different ways. I see Sarah Sims is on the call today, and Sarah, I might call on you at some point. Sarah and I worked together at Boys Town with kids that were in shelter care. Kids that had some pretty significant felonies facing them. And the judges felt they weren't safe for themselves, or maybe the community, or we needed more information to make good decisions. And those kids came to our Rule 18 school. We set out to teach those kids to be more hopeful. And our average length of stay, Sarah, what would you say? 50, 55 days, 45, 55 days, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I'd say anywhere from 30 to 60 days on average.
So we were able to show that we could inspire those kids to have more hope in that little amount of time that we had with them. And I'll give you more examples of that as we go along today. So the great thing about hope, it's the #1 predictor of future success outcomes for kids and adults. It's easily defined. You already saw the definition of it. It's skill-based. And since it's skill-based, that means we can teach it. We can teach kids to practice hope. And it's easy to measure. And we can let those measures drive some of our programming.
Excellent. So yeah, I think one of my favorite stories from the book, just to kind of reinforce some of the things that Scott was saying, the book that we just referenced, Hope Rising, is when the authors went out in national TV to talk about their findings and talk about their research, and they wanted to find a quick way to prove to someone how being more high hope leads to better outcomes in the end. Is they asked the two broadcasters, the two individuals in charge of the show, to take the hope assessment. And so they knew that after the results, one of them was a high hope person, the other one was a little bit lower. And so they had this challenge. They had a bucket full of water with lots of ice, very, very cold. And so the challenge was just like, okay, put your hands in there and see who can last the longest, right? And so guess who lasted the longest? The person with high hope. That despite the fact that that person was going through adversity, was going through something painful, he knew that there was a brighter future ahead. And he knew that if he had the willpower and the perseverance to continue on that task, that eventually that pain would go away, right? But so he won the challenge. So he outlasted the other person, right? So it's just kind of a silly way of measuring and showing these, right? But like Scott said, there's over 2,000 studies showing these. I can remember Kelsey's question. It's been measured through a survey. There's a lot of data collection that has gone through, particularly through Gallup. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's identify the different components that form what hope, the framework of hope science is, right? So in order to have hope, yes, you have to have that belief that there's a brighter future ahead, right? But we talked about in the definition that hope requires that you also assume responsibility for making that happen. And that's something that we can learn, right? So it can be taught, it can be measured, and it can be reevaluated and reassessed as you go through life. So think about this. Hope is that bright future ahead, right? But in order to achieve that brighter future, you need pathways and you need agency. So pathways or way power, and agency and willpower. So the analogy here is, let's say your hope, your brighter future is that you want to go take a vacation in Colorado. This is one that Scott uses often, right? So in order to get to Colorado, to that brighter future over there in the beautiful mountains, you need pathways. You need to know how you can get there, right? So what kinds of things do you need in order to get to Colorado, right? Well, you need a map, or nowadays a GPS, right? But you need some sort of guidance, some sort of way in which you can achieve that. You need to know that you will need to stop for gas. You need to know that, well, it takes this much time to get there, and what could happen as you're traveling there. There's obstacles that can arise, right? You can get a flat tire. Well, maybe you need to figure out how you can solve that problem, right? So that you don't get discouraged and say, well, I'm not going to get ever to Colorado, right? So that's kind of the pathways. Now, the agency is your perseverance in wanting to achieve that, your motivation, your persistence in order to make it to Colorado. So we can think about it that way, right? So it's not only the hope, the bright future ahead of us, because then that becomes a wish. I wish that things for my life would be better. But if I don't have a way of achieving that, the mindset that is required in order to create goals that I can assess, to understand that when I am trying to set goals, that there's going to be setbacks, and that I need to find ways to be resilient when those setbacks happen, so that I can overcome them, or I can reassess my goals, right? And that I have the willpower and the motivation in order to get to that place, right? To have the energy that I need to expend in order to make those goals happen, so that I can get to my ultimate outcome. Anything else you'd like to add here, Scott? Maybe some examples, because you have some really good ones.
Well, I would like you to think about the kids you're working with. And Sarah, I might come back to you a little bit just to have a little bit of a conversation again. Because I think they're good examples of the kinds of kids that people on this call today are working with. Kids involved in the justice system to some level. So when kids would show up to the program that you used to run at Boys Town, Sarah, describe to us kind of their thinking about the world when they showed up.
Well, certainly negative about their circumstances, pretty negative about the system, frustrated, like, why am I here? Where's my family? Why am I away from everyone I care about? And not so sure they can trust us as adults as they walked in. So
Absolutely. That probably sounds familiar to many of you. That you know, kids didn't gleefully run into the shelter. They didn't want to be there. And if we started out by asking them, tell us about your bright future, oftentimes their bright future was something like changing the judge. You can make Judge Brown do this, or you can tell Judge Sirkovich to quit being blah, blah, blah. You can imagine the things that they would say when we asked them what they needed in their lives. Sarah, do you think that they saw ways out of their situation, or did they have the skills they needed to deal with the obstacles that they encounter?
Well, that would be why we had 24/7 awake staff observing their behavior. So no, I would say they don't always have the self-control to manage their behaviors.
Yeah, thanks. So again, I want you to personalize it to the kids you're working with, and to really to see how this plays out. Gallup in our own backyard has been surveying kids since 2009 in what they call the Gallup engagement, this Gallup engagement survey for kids. And they have told us, the number has remained pretty much stagnant since 2009, that fewer than half of our kids meet the definition of being hopeful. Isn't that amazing? The number one predictor of future well-being outcomes for kids. Number one predictor. And yet fewer than half of them have it. Now, we say that hope is three things. I have a bright future. I see a vision for a bright future. I have goals and pathways that can get me there. And I have the skills I need to handle the challenges and obstacles along the way. American youth lead the world. Gallup has done this research in multiple countries, and our kids lead the world in one of those. Which of those three statements do you think our kids lead the world in? I believe I have something great's ahead of me. I have pathways to it, or I can handle challenges and obstacles. Put your speculation in the chat or chime in. What do you think our kids lead the world in? Anybody want to chat it over with me? Unmute and have a conversation? If not, I'm going to come back to you, Sarah. You didn't know you were co-presenting today, did you?
I think there's someone who's going to talk.
Oh, John.
John.
Yeah, John unmuted as well. So let's have a conversation about the kids you're working with. Any speculation about what they do? Do they see that they have do they anticipate great things ahead of them? Do they have pathways, and do they have the skills they need to regulate their emotions while they're working their way there? If anybody talks to a third grader, I love talking to little kids, and you say to them, what do you want to be when you grow up? They have the best answers. They will tell you social media influencers, professional athletes, all these things. American youth lead the world and believing they're going to do great things in their lives ahead. Our kids attest to that statement more than any kids in any other country. And I love having conversations. Oh, you want to be a professional football player? What position do you play? Oh, I've never played before. They don't necessarily see all the connections, but they believe in this bright future. Fewer than a third of our kids, excuse me, less than 33% have the skills they need to manage the frustration and the obstacles that get in their way. So my question to you is, we've known this. Snyder told us all of this, that hope was the number one predictor for future success outcomes for kids and adults, all the way back in 1991. The child scale was piloted in 1996. So we've known it for 30 years. What's wrong? What are we missing? Why haven't we solved this issue? Any speculation?
Just throw stuff out there. We really depend on your interaction to make these more driven.
In your work, what deficits do you see? Why are only less than half of our kids hopeful? And why do fewer than a third of them have the skills they need to, I would call them executive functioning skills? That ability to problem solve, to handle frustration and anger. What's getting in the way?
Could it be that it wasn't modeled appropriately for them?
Absolutely, it could be. Ben, thank you. Absolutely. What we have to look at their environment. It's one thing to have a bright future, but what if nobody that looks like me has ever made that bright future? What if nobody in my family has ever realized that bright future, or anybody in my neighborhood. I don't know anybody. I might believe that going to college is a good thing for me, but nobody in my life has ever made it. So it could be that it's never been modeled for them.
I'm seeing a lot of responses to Scott, so kind of around the same theme, right? External factors, it hasn't been modeled, poverty, psychosocial barriers, confidence, lack of positive mentors, the environment they're in, caregivers, and absolutely, those are all true things, right? But we also know that despite the fact that sometimes environmental factors play a role in that, if we have more supports in our community to model those things to kids who find themselves in those environments, that there's a greater likelihood that we can help them cultivate that hopeful attitude, right?
One of the key elements of hope is that it's contagious. If I surround myself with high hope people, I'm going to be more high hopeful. So hopelessness is also contagious. If I live in an environment where there's not a lot of hope, chances are I'm not going to have a lot. Shane Lopez from Gallup set out to do the research to figure out what's the impact of a high hope person. And he was able to trace that person's impact through 4 levels of relationships before it disappeared. 4 levels. That means that you, as a high hope person in a child's life, can have an impact on that child. That child's hope level goes up, which can have an impact on his family or his siblings. And if, say, it impacts his parents, they go to work and that hope can have an impact on their people before we lose the ability to track that. So it's very, very contagious.
Yeah. Scott, I believe Jay Martinez was going to say something. I don't know if you accidentally unmuted, but if you're still there and wanted to say, go for it.
Sorry, I'm late to the party, but no, I thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I hope to learn some stuff that's going to help our organization. Appreciate it.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, I think to just reinforce and just get that message out, right? It's a lot about modeling. It's a lot about teaching each other how to achieve goals, how to set goals, but also setting goals that are realistic, right? And that are driven by the person, not by you as the mentor or as the adult, right? Let's move on to just another important topic, because I imagine that in your world, you're seeing a lot of trauma, right? Just like we see here at Project Harmony, a lot of the children who come here and their caregivers have been impacted by a lot of difficult situations in life, a lot of adversity, right? So we're talking about ACEs. We've mentioned that significantly. And I know one of the things that is also well researched in developing and cultivating that hopeful mindset is that it can help mitigate the effects of trauma. If you ever get that book, I highly encourage it. There's tons of examples and tons of stories in there that highlight just that very fact, that despite the adversity that you went through as you were growing up, if you develop that hopeful mindset, it's better. It's a higher predictor that you will be able to survive your trauma, right? Integrate it well and live to your fullest potential, right? Which is, after all, what we want. Like I said earlier, I oversee Trauma Matters OMA, right? And so our hope is to help people understand that traumatic stress is if the impacts of it can be viewed from the lens of hope, right? And it can become a crisis of hope if a person is not fully integrated with those traumas, if that person does not have the support, the guidance, the models who can show that person how to achieve that, then there's greater likelihood that the traumatic stress response continues throughout their life, right? So we want to get to a place where we help in mitigating these factors, right? So yeah, like I said, there's a growing body of research. And as you probably already know too, ACEs continues being very, very heavily studied. And we are understanding more and more about how it affects us physiologically, how it affects us psychologically. I always like to think that The only thing that we all have at any given moment is our mind, right? And our mind and how we view life and how we form those kind of dangerous loops sometimes that create those feelings and create those behaviors is guided by our thoughts, right? So if we can find a way to frame our thoughts differently, we can cultivate the skill to become more hopeful, right? So let's talk about these few questions. Let's have another conversation. What is the opposite of hope? Let's just start there. What do you think? Again, post it on the chat or unmute yourself. We prefer to have the conversation, so we love to hear voices. Don't be shy. I know it's been weird. 2 years on the screen kind of has taken a toll on all of us psychologically, but I highly encourage you to speak up.
Hopelessness.
Hopelessness, absolutely.
Hopelessness and despair, says Stephanie through the chat. What other thoughts do
Good
you have?
words. What else?
Despair.
What does it look like?
Okay, somebody said despair, Deborah. Yeah.
Yep.
Uncertainty, fear, doubt, distrust, right? More despair without dreams, says Jay Martinez. Yeah. What about the next question? What happens if I see the bright future but can't find the pathways? What do you think happens there? What do you develop there?
So I'm that kid who can see a bright future ahead of me, a great job maybe, or a passion, a way to use my passion, but nobody around me can show me how to get there. What does that manifest in me? What's it turn into? And keep in mind, I'm experiencing that over and over. It's not just once, but I'm hitting that wall all the time.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of answers here in the chat, Scott. So
Yep.
You lose motivation, depression, frustration, anger, sadness, doubt, possibly frustrated, give up, low self-esteem, giving up and feeling sad. Yeah. Great
And
answers,
somebody
everybody.
mentioned the word anger.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that one. One of the opposites of hope is rage. Anger and rage. If I'm a kid and I see that bright future, but I can't figure out how to get there, and I just hit that wall over and over and over and over, yes, frustration, yes, sadness, but it keeps happening over and over. It's nonstop. Eventually, I get pissed off. I get angry, and it turns into violence. So when we talk about the violence problem that we have in our country today, 2015 was the first year that we had more mass shootings than we had days in the year. A mass incident being 4 more victims. We went over 365 in 2015. We just passed 700 this year, and we have almost a whole month in front of us. That's doubling what we've seen in the last 7 years, doubling it. When I go and do this work in school districts and I say to them, tell me about your discipline events since you came back to school from COVID. Because COVID was a trauma experience for our kids, for many of us as well. But it was a trauma for kids, and they lost a lot of hope. Their bright future was, I want to be in school, I want to be in my friends, I want to be normal, I want to have this life. And I can't do that, or I have this stupid mask, or whatever. So when you came back, what happened to your discipline? And across the board, every district I talk to, OPS, Bennington, Ralston, wherever I go, they tell me the same thing. Our numbers remained about the same, but the violence and the aggressive tendencies skyrocketed. We saw far more aggression than we'd seen in the past. We saw more violence. We saw more dramatic incidences. That's a crisis of hope. So we can identify these kids pretty easily. The problem is, so often we tend to diagnose them with things or put them on meds. It can be as simple as, let's take these kids and teach them to be more hopeful. So Sarah, I'm going to come back to you again. How many of those kids that came to us in shelter care landed there because of some act of rage?
Quite a few. Quite a few were coming out of our detention center. So yes, there was some sort of extreme incident that occurred.
So when my pathways are blocked, it manifests as rage. Now, if I can see that bright future, and I have people that can show me how to get there, I find the roadmap, but no matter how hard I try, I can't get past the obstacles. Maybe I like the college one, just seems like an easy example to use. I see that I have this career in front of me. I want to go there. My guidance counselor and my parents have told me what tests I need to take, what applications I need to do. But no matter what, I can't figure out how to get the money to go. If I have a bright future and I see pathways, but I can't deal with the obstacles, and that happens to me over and over and over again, it turns into despair and depression and anxiety. So we co-locate with the Kim Foundation, local organization that works on suicide prevention. What Kim will tell us is, and Boys Town National Hotline can tell us, is levels of suicidal thinking are at all-time highs again for our young people and for our adults, right? This holds true for both kids and adults. So as a country, we have some major crises with violent action. We also have a real crisis around despair and depression. Both of those can be manifestations of hopelessness. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? If we can identify these kids, what do we do about it? Javier, why don't you jump forward to the assessments? Let's let people assess their hope, and then we'll come back and pick these two up. It's a little out of order there. So I want to start out the what do we do about it by letting you assess, see what a hope assessment looks like. This is the adult hope scale. It's readily available free online. The child hope scale is the same. The adult hope scale was released by Snyder in 1991. It's valid, reliable. It's been used in multiple research studies. It's 8 questions. Here are the first 4, and we would like you to answer them using the scale to the right, where 1 is a statement that is definitely false for you, and 8 is definitely true. So if you have a piece of scratch paper, just jot down your answers to these 4 questions. And I want to use them before we go to the next 4. I want to give you an example of how we can tell the difference between pathways and agencies, because these 8 questions will stand out by your pathways or your agency. Any question that asks you about a way to doing something, look at number 1. I can think of many ways to get out of a jam. That's a pathway. Number 3, pathway. It has ways in it. Number 4 is a pathway question. Number 2 responds to my energy. The energy I bring into working towards my goals. That's my agency. I energetically pursue my goals. So I want you to just see the difference between the pathway questions and the agency questions. Okay, again, if you just jot them down 1 through 8.
Maybe just to kind of give us an idea of where you're at when you're done with those 4 first questions, just say done on the chat, and then we can kind of keep a gauge and then move to the next slide. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of dones. So I'm moving on to the next 5 questions. If somebody didn't get the chance to complete these ones, just let me know and we can go back to them as well, or I can just post them on the chat so that you can have reference.
Number 5 should read, even when others get discouraged. I just added these late yesterday, so my apologies. Even when others get discouraged.
Can you go back a little bit, please?
Absolutely.
Yep, thank you.
No problem. We'll go back to the other one in just a little bit. Gonna move on to the next one. Is that okay? Just one more time.
One
Okay.
second.
No problem. Cool. Sorry, just rushed for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh,
And again, this is available online free. You don't have to purchase it, nothing like that. You don't have to have any special licensure to administer it, to score it, none of that.
I'll post that link towards the end of the training as well, so you all have access to it. So
Go ahead, Javier, let's roll forward on those next ones and we'll talk a little bit more about agency and pathways.
yeah, maybe what the other thing I'm gonna do is these. Let me just put them on the chat just in case.
Oh, good idea.
So there's that. And we post the scale.
Look at you overcoming obstacles.
That's right. My issue sometimes is with my agency, Scott. That's my problem. All right, let's go to the next one. Here we go.
And as you look at the wording, again, you can pick it out pretty easily, right? Number 5, I can find a way to solve the problem. That's a pathway question. So we have, and then the next 3 are all examples of how I've persevered, how I've worked and dedicated myself to getting my goals, what experiences I've had with setting goals and being successful with them. Those are all agency questions. So in as few as 8 questions, we can get an overall hope scale score. We can also get a pathway score and an agency score. We can tease it out. So you're going to start out, those of you that are already done, just by adding up your scores. That's going to be your overall hope score. Javier, do you want to copy those 5 through 8 and put those in the chat as well?
Yes. Let's see.
Now, if you thought the adult scale was easy, 8 questions only, the kids is 6. We can get a measure of hope for kids in 6 questions. Both surveys have been around. Adult hope scale has been around since 91, the children's hope scale since 97. So when we decided in the programs I was working in that hope was key to our children's success, this is where we went. We started measuring the kids' hope in school, just like we measure math and reading scores every quarter, we measured their hope every quarter. But we also recognized that we as adults in their lives need to be modeling hope, and that our own hope varies over time. So we measured our own hope using the adult hope scale every time we took it for the kids. So all of a sudden we have 4 measures a year for kids. We have 4 measures a year for adults. Now in the program that Sarah and I worked in together, where we only had kids for a very short amount of time, we tried to give them the assessment within the first day or 2 of their arriving in school. And we tried to do it again if we knew they were going to court and possibly leaving. We tried to give it to them again at the end to see if we'd made a difference. Okay. So did we provide the youth the results of the assessment? Absolutely. And we consciously taught hope science. We taught them to define hope. We taught them about agency and pathways. We consciously taught hope. It was part of the day at 1:30 every day. And I kid you not, those kids were excited to go into those conversations and say, is it time to talk about our hope stuff again? It was pretty cool to watch. So Javier, you want to go forward to the scoring? Again, overall hope scale, measure all 8 together, add them up. If your score was 40 or higher, you're considered hopeful. 48 puts you in a higher category, and to be defined as high hope, we'd like to see you at 56 or more. Now keep in mind, this is a variable. It changes for all of us. And while I'm a big believer in talking to people all the time about hope, we have to acknowledge that there's a time and a place for it. If you just lost someone special to you, someone died, now's not the time for me to come and preach to you about hope, right? So we have to look at it as a tool and know when to use it and when not to use it. You can imagine that when we were working with teachers, we saw variance in the year. You can probably guess, teachers are highest hope in August at the very beginning of the school year. They hit a very low point in around October. They come back up again for January, and they go back down a little bit, not as far, in about March. And then they come back up again at the end of the year. So knowing that our hope levels impacted our kids, we had to look at what are we doing for ourselves. So when it came to the next year and we said, we start the year pretty hopeful, but we hit this really low spot last October. Guess what also happens in October in schools? Your discipline numbers tend to go up across the nation. October is one of the highest discipline months for schools. So we saw that happen, that our numbers went up while our hope went down. So we had a conversation in September the next year and said, last year our hope numbers plummeted. What are we going to do this year differently? What can we do as we head into a rough patch of the year to keep our hope high? And we settled on one thing to try the first year. And that was, we were going to focus on our own relationships. We were going to acknowledge that hope is contagious and that we can support each other in high hope. So as a team, grade level teams, we had 3 questions that we answered. The very first one is, what do I look like on a good day? I had to say to all my peers, how do you know when I'm having a good day? What do I look like? What do I sound like? How do I behave when I'm having a good day? Well, for me, they would say you have a lot more energy, you laugh a lot, you kind of tease and have fun. It's clear you're having fun when you're having a good day. I also had to be brave enough to say, ask the question, what do I look like on a bad day? Okay, and I had to accept that feedback. I had to listen to my peers tell me, you get a little grouchy, you snap a little faster or whatever. I had to just listen to their feedback. And then the question they all ask me is, Scott, what saves you when you're having a bad day? What can turn a bad day into a good day? And when we talk about this, I'm always shocked by people aren't saying things like winning the lottery. You know what people are saying? A cup of coffee. Teachers will sometimes say, I want to go to the bathroom without having to rush to do it within a 3-minute passing period. I just need somebody to check on me and see how I'm doing and listen to me talk for a few minutes. Some people are Kit Kat bars or favorite chocolates. But as part of that conversation, we agreed to have each other's backs. Because what happens in a lot of workplaces is if I walk in and I can tell Javier's having a bad day, by the way, we know when Javier's having a bad day because he cusses in Spanish. That's his sign that he's having a bad day. Right? I know
True. Most of the time I cuss in English, but if I'm having a real bad day, that's when the Spanish, like my childhood, comes out.
So we know that about him. And we know that he has an espresso maker and loves his really strong coffee. So we know what can save it for him. Because normally what happens in a workplace is somebody comes in, here's Javier cussing Spanish and runs to everybody else and says, stay away from Javier, he's having a really bad day, or he's in a really bad mood. And what we should be doing if we're going to be high hope individuals for and with one another is we should run to Javier. Somebody fire up the espresso machine. We got to get Javier turned around. And that's what happens when you have these conversations. You become the backup to somebody else. And all of a sudden, what happens when I walk into Javier's office with that espresso, it's saying to him, I see you. I recognize where you are. I'm here to support you through it. I'm here to help you problem solve and work through the agency problems you might be experiencing. I'll help you find your pathways. I'm your hope champion. When we did that year, our discipline numbers fell by 15%. We didn't do anything different with kids. It was only an intervention we put into place with the adults to be high hope for one another. But we saw it transmitted into the kids' behavior. So hope is contagious. Small experiences of hope build into bigger and bigger experiences of hope. So Javier, if you want to go back to those 2 slides I asked you to skip, I'm sorry for making you jump all around, but it's 15. This is what we're talking about. We provided each other as a staff with an experience of hope. One small experience of hope. And we found the pathway, we created success, and our hope went up by virtue of doing it. When we string multiple experiences of hope together, it becomes powerful. The more I have success with building hope, the more likely I am to engage in that process of setting goals, working on those goals, and experiencing success the next time. So in the program that Sarah and I were talking about, we had those kids for 30 to 60 days. We couldn't necessarily change everything in that child's life. But I can tell you a lot of kids came to us thinking that they were in shelter care because they cussed their judge out in court. We heard that a lot. I got mad at the judge. I told the judge what to do. So when we sit down with them and get them to talk about their anger a little bit and recognize it's not just about what I did with the judge, but my mom would tell you that I've been angry since I was 3. Since I was in kindergarten, I've been getting into trouble. I've been in therapy, nothing works. People have taught me strategies, nothing works. If we get those kids and we start saying, okay, are you willing to do it with us? Are you willing to try again? And what we would do, those of you that know Boys Town know the social skills model, but we would teach strategies. So in week 1, I'm going to teach that kid, 5 times a day, I'm going to teach him a strategy by which he can learn to help control his anger. And at the end of the week, I'm going to be honest with him. My guess is out of those 25, only 1 or 2 of them may have made a difference for you. So you're right. You probably tried a lot that never worked. Let's find 1 or 2 that might work. Week 2, we start practicing it. Sometime in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to come over and say something. What was it that Judge Brown said to you that made you so angry? Okay, I'm going to say that. And what do I want to see? You want me to use my breathing strategy? You want me to use my calming strategy? Absolutely. Practice, really overt practice. Praise, praise, praise when they do it. 5 times a day. Week 3, sometime in the next half hour, I'm going to come over and say something. The advantage to that is now 30 minutes, chances are one of the peers or another adult is going to say something in the meantime that's a real test for that kid. And I get to see how they react to it. Oftentimes they would say, you told him to do that, didn't you? Whatever. Just, did you respond correctly? And if they do, we praise, praise, praise. If they don't respond correctly, we approach it from that experience of growth mindset. You didn't get it this time. That's okay. At least you recognized you didn't get it. Let's go back and practice what it could have looked like. So we recognize that failure is part of the process. We next week expand that out to sometime this morning. We test them over and over and give them lots and lots of opportunities to practice, with the goal that when they go and they leave and try to go back into Judge Brown's courtroom, they are more likely, can't promise them anything, but they're more likely not to engage in that lose my temper, cuss out the judge behavior. Now, I didn't necessarily radically change that child's whole trajectory in life, but we gave him or her this experience. We helped them see pathways. We helped them practice the strategies they needed to keep their agency in control. And we practiced it over and over again and gave them an experience of success. Ideally, probation will continue working with them on that. Their school, when they leave shelter care, will continue. Ideally, we as a system can create multiple experiences to keep a kid's hope heading in the right direction. I just share that as an example. Sometimes people say, well, this is a lot of long-term work. No, this can be really short-term work. It can be 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. We can make a difference in the lives of a kid, in kids' lives. And the way, what we're really talking about, in addition to this really intentional experience of hope, you can go to the next one, Javier. We're doing it in a developmental relationship. We're doing it in tandem with an adult who cares. You work with kids involved in the system, you know, oftentimes they would show up and they would refer to us as Mr. or Miss. I'm not going to learn your name because I don't want to have a relationship with you. It's too hard when I have to leave. I don't want to invest in you, so I'm not even going to learn your name. We treat them kindly. We express our care. We recognize that failure is part of growth. We support them in practicing the skills and building the skills they need to improve. And we offer them their power, help them find their power in working toward that goal. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? What could we do differently? And most importantly, we're helping them see a world that maybe they didn't see before. That kid who comes to me and says, I've been angry since I'm 3, doesn't believe that there's a world in front of me where I can control my anger. We just presented him a vision of a world where I can. We've changed his possibilities and opened the world to him in a new way. That's hope. Now, the developmental relationship framework comes from Search Institute out of Minneapolis. For years, they concentrated their work on the 40 developmental assets, 40 traits of kids, of thriving kids, and we can teach some of those. But what they've started doing in recent years is focusing on developmental relationships, because assets grow within developmental relationships. If we focus on creating these relationships with kids, hope and assets are more easily nourished within that environment. It's a wonderful framework. They take each of these traits, express care, and break it down into normal, multiple behavioral strategies so you can see what it looks like. Wonderful, wonderful framework. So I just want to take a second and pause there and give people the opportunity to ask questions, chime in. What's resonating for you? What are you wondering about? What do you want to challenge? And you can, again, speak out or use the chat room. Something that comes to mind as we're talking.
I'd love to hear an example of what you would do in those situations where you've given the challenge to the kid and you're giving them the hope options. What are those exact tools?
Terrific. What are those tools? What do they look like? We'll talk about that. Who else? I encourage you to share those. I don't want to pause too much longer, but any key insight, any wow, I really wonder about, or I really like this concept, put those in the chat for us. It helps us know what to do in our time that remains. So I'm going to go back to your question. What do we do? Yeah, let's go to that. Javier, slide 23. We have to begin by recognizing that seeing a bright future is a skill, and not all kids have it. Okay. When I first started this work, I was a school administrator in a local school district in 2009. We participated in the initial Gallup survey. Gallup came back and said fewer than half of your kids are hopeful. I'll be honest, I was in white suburbia, Nebraska, Omaha. I would say 85% of our families had college degrees. Fewer than half of our kids had hope. And we said, okay, hope is about goals and working towards goals, so we're going to make all of our kids set goals. They revolted on us. We had them write SMART goals. If any of you were Millard students back in the day, you'll remember, to the tune that at the end of the year, they took their goal packets and they videotaped themselves burning them in bonfires at the end of the school year. And they sent those videotapes of burning their goals to us at school to say, see what we think about our goals. And in hindsight, we couldn't figure out what we did wrong. When you ask kids to set goals and they don't know how, or they don't know what their bright future is, they will give you whatever they think you want to hear to get them off their back. So 90% of our goals were, I'm going to get good grades. I'm going to get my homework done. I'm going to have good attendance. They knew that we as educators would love those goals. I can say this I don't know what my goals should be. I don't know what I'm good at. So they gave us what they thought we wanted to hear, and we bought it. And by focusing on that for the entire school year with them and making them focus on goals they didn't want, made them angry and frustrated. So the very first thing when you say, what are the tools that you do when you sit down with kids, is you recognize that they don't necessarily have these skills, and you establish them as skills and you teach them how to do it. So if I don't have a bright future, I need to engage that child in all the skills that help them. What are your strengths? What are you good at? What do you need to get better at?
So to piggyback to what Scott is saying, I think the first question that we have to always ask ourselves is, who is setting the goal? Whose vision of the bright future is playing out in here? Is it the child or is it me? Now, as someone who has also been in education, I can attest to what Scott is saying, that typically is the teachers and the administration and the school system and the parents who are setting the goals and who are putting the image of the bright future into those kids. And sometimes we forget a very important fact, and that is that sometimes projecting into the future, particularly when we are young, is very difficult, right? So when you have a ninth grader coming in and we're already telling them, what do you want to do for college? We're asking them to think about 4 or 5 years ahead. They don't even know
Educational
what they like.
malpractice.
Yeah, I agree. So it really starts with us. The tool starts with us recognizing and bringing to awareness that very fact is that sometimes we as adults seem to think that we know what's best for them. And, you know, with good reasons, because now we've already been living and dealing with the difficulties and challenges of life. And we say, well, you know, if I had done these differently, maybe I would be in a better place, but I didn't do it, etc. So I am going to now have younger generations understand what they need to do in order to be in a better place. But that is not realistic, and it typically backfires.
So in your work, ask yourself that question: who sets the goal? Because if we step in and we set the goal, we set the pathway, and we provide the agencies, our kids and families will do what we put in front of them, but we've not built their hope in any way, shape, or form. They simply jumped a bunch of hurdles that we put in front of them. So if it's the judge that's defining success, or the therapist who's defining it, the caseworker, the parent, as much as possible, we need to let the kid define what that goal is. And it needs to align to some passion for them. I knew we were onto something when I walked into a classroom one day and I asked a child, remember, to begin with, all we heard was good grades, attendance. They were giving us what they thought we wanted. When we started listening to them and really nurturing their passions, helping them understand what they're good at, rather than asking them to set a goal in August, we asked them to set goals in November. And we spent August to October talking about, what do you love? Tell me more about that. What are you good at? What do you struggle with? If you could change anything, what would it be? We spent 3 months diving into those questions. One of my 4th graders set the goal for himself to learn how to draw his 6 favorite bugs. This was a kid who you had to search his pockets before he came in from recess. One day he tried to bring a locust in. And he said, I didn't think anybody would notice. And it's like, well, when it goes, ree, ree, I think we would notice. So his passion was bugs. This was also a kid who had a lot of behavior problems. Given a math worksheet, if he encountered a problem he couldn't do, he ripped it up, he threw it, he flipped his desk. So all of a sudden we had an opportunity. We had been trying to teach him strategies for months, but now I have something that's aligned to his passion. So Liam, what do you think is going to happen the first time you draw a bug and you're not very good at it? Are you going to be successful right away? How many times are you going to have to try to draw that locust before you think you're good at it? He told me 40 to 50. I said, okay, so can we agree that for the first 40 to 50 times you draw that locust, you don't need to rip it up if it's not good? That you don't need to flip the table if it's not good? I know you're going to be frustrated, and we can help you do some strategies to keep calm. All of a sudden, he's willing to listen to me because the strategies that we're doing align to one of his passions. It wasn't just us saying, you have to stay out of the office, or a judge saying you have to go to school. It was something that he built himself. So we really have to spend the time investing in getting to know kids and what's really important to them. I was cautious with him because his goal was to learn to draw his 6 favorite bugs. He's 4th grader. It's hard to project 6 weeks into the future, 1 bug a week. But since we only focused on 1 bug a week, we agreed to go and break that bigger goal into smaller goals. But it worked for him.
Oh, sorry, Scott. There's just a couple things on the chat that I want to address. Well, first, Jasmine said she liked how you mentioned the calling Mr. and Mrs. because that happens a lot and they she didn't realize that's why that happens. And so it made me think of that saying, you know, I don't care what you think until I know that you care, right? And so yeah, sometimes they come in knowing that, you know, they're just there briefly, that there's no point for them to know who you are. And it's sometimes partly because I think they feel that you don't care. And I know, because I've been in that situation where I've had to work with many kids, many students, and I noticed how some of them were just calling me Mr. Mrs. But I also noticed that the ones that I was putting a lot of effort to build that relationship with eventually started learning my name, right? So it's a process, and it takes a while. And so I think we just have to go in with the recognition that that is going to be an expected behavior until we can portray, or we can let kids know that we do care, that I do care about you. But how do I show that care? How do I build that relationship, right? So when we talk about those developmental relationships in the 5 points that Scott was talking about, that is part of the process, right? Is that I have to show you that I care first, right? For me to engage with you. So it's that process of building relationship, right? And if it starts with me saying, well, this is going to happen, so what's the point? Then we're already defeated, right? And when we know that we will never be able to develop that trust and that relationship, right? And there's another question. Ashley says, how can you foster hope when a youth might not have a bright future because they might be going to prison for a while? Okay. That is a tough one. So I can't relate because I haven't worked with that population, but I can find kind of an analogy here. So I used to work with immigrant and refugee populations. And I used to work with a lot of students at the high school level. Many of them were immigrants who came here undocumented, right? And so the goal that the school wanted for them typically focused on going to college, right? So when I talked to a lot of those students and I was pushing for academic development so that they can get to college, eventually I had one of them say, well, but Mr. C, why does that matter if I won't be able to go to college? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, he's like, well, I don't have papers. They're not going to accept me. And even if they accepted me, what would be the point after that? And that just hit me like a wall. You know, it's just like I just came to a stop because I'm like, well, you know, you do make a good point, right? Because you have to also be understanding and realistic of the opportunities and the realities, right? So it's tough to juggle those things. I feel that despite the fact that that seems like an obstacle, that even maybe there's no possibility for that child to even get a job after gaining a college degree, because I think there's opportunities for kids to go to college despite the fact that they don't have documents, that even if they were not able to get to a place where they can get a job, there was still the possibility that if they went back to their country, they went back to their country with a college degree. So there is an opportunity there. But then also, you don't know how things happen and how things change within 4 or 5 years. Now, I don't know the length of time that you're typically seeing. I guess I obviously imagine that it depends on what the situation was that will determine how long they will be in prison for. What is the bright future after they leave prison, right? And like Scott had said earlier, yeah, at that point, that kid might be in a place where you cannot go and lecture about hope because they're already dealing with the trauma of having to be punished and having to stay in prison for a while. So it's a matter of timing. But as time goes by, how do you develop that relationship to help that kid know that there are still possibilities, that there is still a possibility for a brighter future? And I imagine all of you work in this field partly because you feel like that is true, that even though there's obstacles and there's challenges after they leave, that there is a possibility of having a better life, because I'm sure you've seen it in other people.
And in that particular situation, what Javier said is really important. I think we have to let that child transition through that trauma of being incarcerated. And once they're there, start talking to them about what's available to you here that might help make your future better. What programming's here? Can you finish your school while you're here? What kinds of career skills could you learn while you're here? What kinds of personal social skills? Is there therapy available to help you learn those anger and control pieces? So as long as we're alive, there's a quality of life issue that we can talk about people and what makes your life better versus what makes it worse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those are good questions.
Yeah, and so when we see that last point on the slide, see myself in the available options, right? So you have to factor in the situation, the current situation, and that the goals and the hopes and the bright future might not be what other people are typically seeing. You have now experienced something else. What is it that you can learn from these challenge? What is it that you can learn from these adverse experience? How can you utilize that to turn it around and make it into a strength?
One of the things I loved most about working with Sarah's programming was that she gave us the opportunity to show kids available options that they hadn't seen before. A lot of our kids knew they had the skills to be in a gang. They had the skills to carry a gun or to commit a crime. You know what they didn't know? They didn't know how to use time in a productive leisure activity like camping or fishing. So we had fishing poles and we took them to the Boys Town Lake and taught them how to fish. This time of year, we taught them how to build gingerbread houses. Now you would think taking kids and facing serious felonies and putting a gingerbread house in front of them that it's going to get thrown in your face, but they had never seen those productive, fun ways of using time. And Sarah, do you want to comment on how your kids respond to those kinds of things?
Trying to get myself unmuted, sorry. It was always some of our best days, right? When the kids would just engage in normalized activities that they hadn't had an opportunity to engage in before. And for the most part, they all participated well, spoke highly of those events that were happening at the school or even the things that occurred back at the home with the youth care workers. So very positive.
Yeah, thank you. But those are things nobody had ever taught them. Nobody had ever taught them that there's ways of going and spending your downtime that don't involve a gang or don't involve running the streets. So providing kids those opportunities that maybe have never been shown to them is an important part of helping them see a bright future. The next slide asks the same question. What are the skills that we need to teach kids to find pathways? So, for example, we need to teach them how to trust adults to help them. A lot of our kids don't trust adults. They've been burned too many times. So as Javier was talking about developmental relationships, sticking with them because they're going to test us before they start working with us. They're going to show us what they can do to see if they can push us away. And if we stay with them and we stay growth focused and we stay positive with them, then all of a sudden they'll start asking us for help. But that's a key skill to finding pathways. I couldn't be where I am in life today if I hadn't had hundreds of people in my life saying, go that way, do this next. Here's the next class to take. Here's the next job. So we have to do that. We have to help them project into the future. Rule of thumb for me as a mental health therapist is 1 year or 1 day for every year old you are. So if you're 15 or 16 years old, I think you can reliably project about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks with really strong executive function. But like Javier said, how many kids walk into the 9th grade and the very first thing they start hearing is you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. What kids will do, and most kids in that situation, they'll just turn us off. They'll just quit listening to us and they'll give us rote service. They'll just chime back and echo it back to get us off their backs. But they won't really engage in the work. A better choice with 9th graders would be, tell me what your favorite class is. Oh, really? You love biology? What is it about biology that you really like? Did you know that there's all these interesting careers that take biology? And when when you're here in school for the next few years, if you love biology, you can take this class, you can take this class. Help them see the possibilities of what they're doing right now today into their future, and mostly what they can do with their passions. Help them see possibilities that relate to their passions that they never knew. I'm going to call out Javier here, because Javier did a lot of graduate work in music. That's one of his passions. My guess is when he started exploring those passions, other than seeing professional musicians, he didn't know a lot of ways that people could use music in their careers and in their lives. But that came by virtue of lots and lots of interactions with professors, with mentors, with peers who helped him see those possibilities.
Here's what I learned through music, and I think it parallels and it transfers to many aspects of life. And I think there's many examples out there when you talk about developing skills that are challenging, be it in science, be it in sports, be it in whatever, right? Is that, and it's right here on the slide, and is that you have to break tasks into smaller, manageable action steps. So sometimes our bright future, or when we provide that bright future to someone, is overwhelming because it seems like it's this big, big thing that just seems so unachievable and it seems so far away, right? And so we're so focused on the bright future that we forget sometimes that, well, we just have to chunk things out. And that what gives us most energy to persevere is to say, well, I can just put in my work day to day, right? And even though it seems like this small task is not building to get to this place, it is, because we sometimes often forget how quickly or how much we can accomplish in 1 year when we do little by little. Because we're always thinking about we need to achieve this big thing in this very short amount of time, when that is completely unrealistic. So when I was in music school, for example, one of the things that we had to do is, well, we had to work towards our recital, and our recital had to be an hour and a half worth of music. And that is a significant amount of stuff that you have to learn. And it requires motor skills, and it requires memorization, and it requires a lot of different skills that you develop through time. So when I started focusing on that big picture, it got overwhelming because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to learn all of this stuff. But when I started saying or hearing from other people say, well, just take your time, right? Just do one thing every day, focused on that one thing for a few days, and then move on to the next one. So that becomes less overwhelming, right? And it when you start developing that, it is a long-term view, but it's a long-term view that I now have to look for, through the lens of the short-term tasks that I have to do. When I focus on the small picture, after knowing the big picture, if I reframe it to go back to that short-term kind of tasks that I have to do, it feels manageable, and it doesn't feel stressful, and it doesn't lead to rage, and it doesn't lead to despair, because now I know that I can handle it. And it's empowering to know that I can manage this little thing here. And this little thing is going to build to this. So if we can work on developing and cultivating that mindset in ourselves, because I think sometimes we're focusing so much on what the others are doing that we forget that we also are victims of the overwhelm and the stress, because we have this big picture that seems so unachievable and so far. So that's what building pathways requires, right? Is that you have the ultimate goal, but then you have to chunk it. You have to break it into things that are manageable, that you can identify as something that you're actually capable of accomplishing, right? And that you're not projecting so far in the future, that you're projecting in smaller scales.
I love that story, Javier. I've heard you talk about that portfolio or that recital before, and heard you tell that story. So thank you for doing it. How often have we, even as adults, given something up because it was too hard? We looked at something huge and it was too overwhelming and we let it go. I can see young Javier looking at that recital and saying, dang, I can never get there. I'm going to change my major. I'm going to go a different way. But having people in your life that could coach you on, for today, let's just learn this section of this one piece of music, gave you something you could bite off and focus on without having to worry about 2 years down the road. Love that story. So that's what we do with Pathways. We have to help kids find them. And sometimes they have to re-goal. They have to say, that's my big one, but here's what's really real for me right now. Here's a step that I can take. Remember, small steps of experiencing hope make it more likely that kids will engage in more hopeful steps. So something small. Learning to draw my 6 favorite bugs over time can turn into much bigger things. So that's Pathways. Agency is the last one we want to talk about, of course. And again, with agency, this is the one that fewer than a third of our American youth have. So this is where we need to spend the majority of our time. And we have to recognize when kids have the skills or don't have the skills. And a lot of times we do shoulding. This kid's 16, he should know how to. That's going to be a problem because there's a lot of 50-year-olds who don't know how to do some of these things, right? So if we can break down whatever's most getting in that youth's way, be it anger, be it despair, be it any kind of emotional regulation deficit, we can teach those things. Now, it's easiest to break the skill into really specific steps that a kid can practice, and practicing it when they're calm, practicing it before they have to use it. So when I talked about the young person that needed to get his anger under control before he went back into court, picture yourself there. That might be step one, is picture yourself back in front of Judge Brown again. Picture him making that comment that made you angry. Now picture yourself responding differently than you did last time. We're doing this all when he's calm. Okay, and then we're teaching him strategies that he can use to stay calm when he's calm before we ask him to start practicing. Then we're going to practice. We're going to practice a lot. It's not just a matter of teaching somebody one skill and saying now they're independent with it. We have to teach it. We have to practice it over and over and over again. We want them to identify what are the things that might get in their way and anticipate them. There's a great story about Michael Phelps going to the Sydney Olympics, and there was a race he was largely favored to win. And as he turned the corner swimming and made that flip turn, his goggles came off. And the people calling the race noticed that that had happened, and they said, you know, they started talking about him losing the race because his goggles had come off. He went on to win. And when people asked him how he had overcome that setback, he said, when I go through a race in my mind, I try to anticipate anything that could get in my way. So I had already anticipated that my goggles could come off and I might lose my vision as I was in this race. He said, so what I did was I counted how many strokes it took me to get from one end of the pool to the other. So when I lost my vision, I still had my ability to count my strokes, and it didn't interrupt me at all. So helping kids identify what those obstacles are and plan for those obstacles. Practice what they need to do to handle those obstacles when they encounter them, so that they don't just have a huge explosion and leave it and say, I'm never going to come back to this again, but they understand that it's there. Of course, maintaining a growth mindset is key for this. I'm not there yet. I failed today. Just because I failed today doesn't give up all the practice and all the great work I've made so far. So helping them continue thinking. And we all work with kids who have made some really significant mistakes. Kids who are paying big prices for the mistakes they've made. It's important that we help them see that the world is, that there's still possibilities out there in front of them, that those mistakes that they made at 12 or 15 don't have to define them for the remainder of their lives. So agency and teaching them how to handle those emotions, how to re-goal, is super important in all of this work. So I want to take a second again and check in with you. What are those big questions that you have? What are the ahas you're having or the challenges? What about this? Throw those questions at us. We want to make sure that we're getting you what you need.
Or maybe you can also turn it around a little bit and think about situations that you've been in where you've used approaches like these. What did that look like, right? What was the outcome? Because I think just in showing some of the examples in your own work of situations where you've used this approach, and sharing it with other people helps instill that sense of hope as well.
Any situations you want to kick around? Any situations like, yeah, what about this kid? So my question to you then would be, we need to practice hope skills ourselves. So from your perspective, as people doing this work every day, what are the obstacles that get in the way of doing this kind of work? In your daily practice of your job, what interferes? I can give you a great example from the field of education. Teachers often say to me, you want me to try to make a kid mad? You want me to push buttons? Teachers don't want possible explosions in their classrooms. So when we're talking about teaching kids these skills, these emotional regulation skills, and giving them opportunities to practice them, a lot of teachers are resistant to doing it because they're afraid that it's going to cause a disruption. So that's an obstacle we have to overcome, right? And the way we overcome that with teachers is doing it in really simple ways first. I'm not asking you to go cold and make this kid angry. I'm asking you to walk over and say, in 5 minutes, I'm going to come over and you're going to pretend that I said something that made you angry and you're going to show me what you're going to do. Kids can do that. We don't have to make them intentionally angry to practice that skill in that moment. We don't have to jump to the end. We can start really, really simple. We can recognize that you as that one teacher don't have to do it all. Over the course of the day, this kid has 6 or 7 teachers. So I'm going to ask every teacher to contribute this much to it. So nobody's owning it all. We can come together and do it. What role might the therapist play versus the probation officer versus the teacher versus the school administrator? We can all be part of a team, right? Which also brings up another obstacle of time. And how do we adequately collaborate with one another? Right? Those are things that can get in our way. So what other obstacles might there exist in your career to doing this kind of work with young people and their families?
Broken relationships between family members.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we have to remember that the child doesn't exist alone. It exists within a community and a family. And one of the largest struggles we had, Ben, that makes your comment resonate for me was we had kids that I worked with that I felt like we were teaching the child to be more hopeful. but the parent wasn't. The parent couldn't find their hope for their child. They still were identifying the kid as a problem or as a behavior. So to that end, we recognized that we had to start talking to our parents about hope as well. It wasn't enough just to do the work with kids. We had to try to expand it so that other people in their lives could learn hope science, could learn that change is possible, and start to trust that change is possible. Again, some of our kids have done really significant behaviors that have really hurt people. So that idea of forgiveness or giving another chance when it may feel like that's the 3,000th third chance I've extended to that child can be difficult. So I think it's key that we really talk about teaching hope science to everybody that's working with that child and that family. Love that one. Another obstacle.
Stephanie just posted something in the chat, and I agree, right? The lack of positive informal support networks makes developing hope difficult sometimes, right? It's just kind of related to what we were just talking about, is that knowing that the environment that they'll go back to can present that challenge and that obstacle, right? And so I think this is one of those questions that it really goes into the realm of systems failure, right? Systems failures. And this is where it gets kind of grim sometimes, because we're all trying to remain as positive and as hopeful as possible. But then kids sometimes go back to those places and there's nothing there. So to Scott's point, again, is if we want the child to, I kind of relate it from the perspective of Project Harmony, right? The work that we do here. So we sometimes hear from our providers that, you know, the child comes here, maybe there's a disclosure of sexual abuse, right? And oftentimes the immediacy of that trauma makes it that we set up supports, formal supports, in terms of therapy, to provide the child with coping therapy, to provide coping ideas so that they can survive that. And sometimes I talk to the providers and they say, well, you know, the best thing that we can really do is offer those supports to the caregivers first, right? Because the caregiver, the child has already been coping with what has happened to them, right? And it's terrible. But they've already developed some sense of the defense mechanism, be it good or bad, but they've been dealing with it. But when the caregiver finds for the first time that that's happening, the amount of crisis and dysregulation that's happening can really make it so that when they go back home, they're not providing the nurturing environment that the child needs in order to thrive. So yeah, so we need to refocus sometimes not only on the child, but providing the supports that we can possibly provide to those caregivers around them so that we can instill that sense of positivity, that sense of hope, that sense of, you know, things can be better, so that they can support and provide those supports to the child that we were already working with. It's challenging. There's a lot of challenges and obstacles that we need to continue finding ways through, right? I feel like there's been progress, right? But there's kind of that ebb and flow, and sometimes it seems like, you know, we want to change all the kids, and sometimes that seems like a very overwhelming task, right? And so we focus on what we can do right now. And in that amount of time, like through little chunks of doing things and helping what we can do and what we can help, then that becomes a greater whole. And then we start seeing the progress, right? So I really think that even though sometimes it feels like things are just getting worse, that we have to recognize the amount of progress that we've made in decades, right? And so it sucks. It sucks because we just want it to be done now and to be changed now, right? But we sometimes have to have that long-term mentality that, yes, progress has happened, right? There needs to be more.
And I want to give you a real concrete example of that, because I think our goal at the Training Institute here at Project Harmony is to reach a point where hope is a common language across our community that allows us to have these conversations all inclusive. In 2015, a group of people came together and said, wow, trauma is really impacting our community, and we don't know what to do about it. People don't understand it. We're seeing behaviors from people that are trauma-based, and people are misunderstanding it. And that local group came together and created Trauma Matters Omaha. And their goal was to create a to train a tipping point of people within the community. They used Malcolm Gladwell's work to set a number of 22,000, which would be a tipping point of people to understand trauma in the Omaha community. To date, Javier's group, Trauma Matters Omaha, has trained over about 35,000 people on what it means to be trauma informed. I was in Lincoln a couple of weeks ago talking to our child advocacy center down there, and I heard them say, we have to do more training around ACEs because nobody in Lincoln has heard about it. Nobody here really understands trauma. And when I came back to Project Harmony, we thought we no longer really spend a ton of time talking about ACEs because 35,000 people in our community know about it. We've passed that tipping point. So yes, it's hard to do that long-term work, but we've got success with the trauma piece in as little as 7 years. So we're going to see this work happening with Hope as well. The Douglas County Health Department has been active in some of this work with us. We have the Educational Service Unit Coordinating Council across the state. Every ESU has been involved in doing Hope work. Omaha Public Schools, Dr. Logan and Lisa Utterback are big Hope champions. They are investing in several of their buildings this year with piloting this work. So we have a good group of people that are driving this work forward, and we look forward to expanding that. So how can you help? In our community calendar at Project Harmony, we have Hope training scheduled every month of the year. Encourage people to come and be part of that. If there's organizations, we will bring the training to people's organizations. We're doing it across the state. So help us spread the word. Help us be Hope champions. That's the biggest message we have for you. It's the single best predictor of future success outcomes, not only for kids, but for ourselves. So it's a good place to plant our focus. So Deb, I think we're right at time, right? We have time to take a question or two if there is one. Or
Scott, we have like about 3 minutes. And so maybe what I wanted to do is just to hear takeaways as a result of this conversation. What do you see doing differently from now on? Or what aspect of these do you want to bring into your practice? So post it on the chat. Let us know.
if some of you are interested in the book that we talked about, Hope Rising, How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. The authors are Gwen and Hellman. If you're reading this, we have developed a book study that goes along with it. You can do it individually, or you can get a group of people together. So we break the book into 4 sections. You read them, then you asynchronously, you can log in at 2 in the morning if you want to. There's about 20 or 25 minutes worth of additional content that we expand the information in the book. That's free to anybody who wants it. We also do this at a book study. Sometimes groups will come to us and say, can we do the book study, but we want you to facilitate a 45-minute conversation at every one of those 4 breaking points. We'll do that for people too. And we have some mental health CEUs aligned to this book as well, if anybody wants that. So those are kind of some things.
And I will post the, I have the links already ready to share. So there's the Hope Score, the assessment that you can access for free, and it's tied to the book as well. And I'll share the Hope Research Center website because there's a lot of resources in there as well. I see Ashley, next time a youth calls me, Miss, I will reintroduce myself to try to foster developmental relationship. Yeah, that's great, right? That's where it starts. And Stephanie, let's see, will we be able to get a copy of the slides, please, to reference for future work? Yeah, I think we can share those with Deborah, and
they will actually be available on the recording that will be on the Douglas County website that you can view.
Excellent. Thank you. So I just posted the Hope assessment link on the chat. So if you want to click on it before we close for today and it disappears, that way you can save it on your browser. And this is the Hope Research Center at the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa. So lots of research in there, lots of stuff in there for you to access. So
There are lots of other assessment tools as
Yes.
well, some that go much more in depth and look at different areas of your life. We just showed you the most basic, easiest to use.
let's see, Martin, juvenile probation in Lancaster County has been looking at implementing Hope throughout our district. We are looking to first start measuring with our staff with the goal of transitioning to youth. We're working on creating activities to positive impact Hope. I would love to hear any activities that you're aware of that will that we could review for ideas. Reach out to us, Martin. Here, I'm just gonna post my email here.
And Lisa asked about how you can get schools involved. Every ESU, so there's 17 educational service units that cover the state, are already trained in Hope Science. So you can always encourage any district to reach out to their ESU. You mentioned Nebraska City. We're actually doing a lot of work this summer with the ESU that's in Auburn. And we'll be seeing them here in the next month as well. So the work is alive in your part of the state. If they want to reach out to the ESUs, that's probably the easiest way for them to connect. This summer, Javier and I will be doing a training of trainers for educators across the state for any school district or ESU that wants to have some Hope champions. So that's an opportunity as well. We would be willing to do that for agencies other than schools as well. So the more we can spread the message and get more and more Hope champions in the world, the better off we're going to be.
So yeah, we're right on time. We thank you for your time and your attention, and we really hope that this is something that you can begin to utilize a little bit more and cultivating yourselves and the people that you're working with. So Deborah, they're all yours.
Yep, thank you, everyone. Just a quick reminder, I'll keep the chat open for a little bit yet. If you need CEUs and you haven't put your information in the chat yet, I need your name and your email address so I can send your attendance certificate to you for application. Thank you, Javier and Scott. This was an awesome presentation. I'm so glad you agreed to do it. If anyone has any further questions, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, my name is Pastor Turkit. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. I appreciate it. So I wrote a lot of things down, you know, for the future lives for me, myself, and for my community. So I learned some a little bit, you know, for young people and adult, how you handle something like something that happened to you. So hope mean you trust yourself, you be a somebody. If you're not somebody, you lost hope. Hope is a love. Hope is a future life for yourself, to do something for future and to become a legacy. So let us do that when we get a chance every month or one time in 2 months. It's about community. I appreciate it. Thank you very much and God bless. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Duke. We appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. So did you need an email from now to anyone or just we send it to you? And another thing, for all these trainings, you can forward it to anyone and sit down and look at it and practice it. That is be a good thing for the future. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. Yeah. Yep.
Well, just to remind you that the recording of this presentation will be available, hopefully by the end of the week on the Douglas County website. So you will be able to view it there.
Very good.
Well,
Thank
if
you.
there's no further questions for Scott or we are gonna leave. Thank you so much. But if you, again, I posted my email in there. If you ever want to reach out and find ways to collaborate with us, we are all for it. So just let us know.